guys again so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to introduce to you Keith Webb, that I'm sure most of you already know. But Keith is an author, speaker, and consultant specializing in leadership development. He is the founder of Creative Results Management, a global training organization focused on helping ministry leaders multiply their impact. For 20 years, Keith lived in Japan, Indonesia, and Singapore, where he designed and delivered leadership development programs to leaders around the world. He is the author of the Reflective Journal for Coaches, Coaching in Ministry, and the Coach Model for Christian Leaders. Keith is the immediate past president of ICF Washington State and lives near Seattle with his wife and their 2 children. And he blogs at keithwebb.com. Keith, welcome.
Thank you, Jenny. That's great. I'm glad to be in here today. And I don't know if my picture popping up on the
Yep, looks good.
On the little window there. So today we're going to talk about why we need to discuss emotions for coaching results. I renamed the talk, but that's what we're after. We're talking about emotions and coaching, how those go together. And what I found is that some coaches are uncomfortable coaching around emotions. And in fact, when strong emotions come out, some coaches are uncomfortable with that. And there's a lot of reasons for it. One reason is coaches are some coaches are quite results oriented, like me. I'm very results oriented coach. And so I'm after result. And so it feels like, or it felt like in the past that sometimes that emotions were like a side trail or not the main thing. It was getting us off track, it felt like. But I learned that strong emotions are not an indicator of being off track or even needing therapy, but it's essential for getting to client results. So I'm going to show you a 5-step process for coaching emotional self-awareness. And just as we get into it, there we go. There's a verse here I think about when it comes to emotions or coaching anything that's interior in your client is this idea from 1 Corinthians 13:12 that for now we see only a reflection in a mirror and then we'll see face to face. So now I know in part, and then I shall be fully known, I'll know fully, even as I'm fully known. The idea is that our self-awareness is not that great, actually. So we only see ourselves as a reflection in a mirror. Remember, their mirrors were terrible. They were shiny pieces of metal or off of a pond or something like that. So their ability is not like our mirrors in biblical times. Our mirrors you see very clearly, but their mirrors weren't. They were shiny pieces of metal or off of a pond, and so it was very dim, and it's not very well. And the idea is that the ability of knowing yourself as we're fully known by God there was a huge gap, and so that's what we're looking at. And I'd love to hear, if you have the handout, you can download it. And if you need any help with that handout, there it is. It just came up. Kelly put it in the chat. So if you go to the chat box, which is in the little control panel at the bottom of the screen, you can get to it. But Kelly can help you with that if you don't have it. You get the handout, you can see it. But here's where we're going to go. Why we coach emotions. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the benefits of clarity of emotions. In other words, there's massive benefit to the client and to anybody if you're clear about your emotions. Unclarity, the other way of saying it, unclarity around your emotions makes you don't get the benefits that I'm going to tell you about. Then I'm going to give you an example of coaching emotional self-awareness, and then a 5-step process of coaching client emotions. So I'd like to pause here for a second and hear about what's your experience with client emotions in coaching. I was hearing from somebody before we started the call saying that when clients are emotional, they're a bit hesitant or afraid or scared. Is this coaching? Is this therapy? What's your experience with coaching client emotions? So you can write something in the chat box. Or I believe that they can come on and say something. Is that right, Jenny? That if they unmute, they can say something?
In this platform, I don't believe we get to see or hear them. So it'll all have to be through the chat.
All right. So then I think there's 3 of us that actually can talk then, 4 of us. So if one of the other people who can talk want to share something, what's your experience coaching client emotions? For the rest of you, put it in the chat box.
Yeah, and I can read as they jump
Yeah.
in and share as well. Bradshaw, just to start, said going from head to heart can suddenly bring on tears.
Yes.
So bringing the emotions that way. I know for me, someone on my team, actually, we just had to discontinue coaching completely because, there's when the emotions get in the way of coaching, and you can't move forward. It was that scenario. We just had to stop completely because they were so overwhelmed with negativity that it literally couldn't take forward action, which is what coaching is for. So we had to stop.
Okay, good. And Walt wrote, I welcome emotions in coaching because it often means a breakthrough is about to happen. So that's a good, interesting perspective there. Sadness and tears, depression or low emotions, happiness, fear. Those are some of the emotions they've experienced. Sherry shared, okay, it just went. Sherry shared something that I can't see because
she shared when a client identifies and clarifies an emotion, new learning can be right on the heels of that conversation.
Okay, there you go. Can be a sign of deep trust. Emotions and significance are often directly correlated. Right. So we're getting it. And someone earlier shared just what you're looking forward to is talking about more than just emotions of sadness, but emotions of anger or passion or something like that. So yes, so I'm hearing a number of different things. And what Jenny shared is also out there too. Whereas you've got, let's just, because I'm remembering Walt said that emotions are like the indicator of we're just about maybe to make a breakthrough when we get to emotions. So that's one side of it. It's like emotions are like the marker of, wow, we're getting somewhere in our coaching. And then a different end of the scale is that emotions are an indicator that we can't keep coaching or something like that. And I find that there's a lot of people uncomfortable with emotions, and there's a lot of difficulty with that. In fact, I do a lot of coaching training, and we'll get it where we'll see people practicing their coaching. They're doing in a workshop, and we'll come over there, and they're kind of looking up, and I go, "What's going on?" And because I kind of come up because they're wondering, they're looking over to me. They're looking for help, basically. And I say to them, "What's going on?" They say, "Well, we reached a point, and she started to cry." And so we have to discontinue coaching because of these emotions, and she needs to maybe I recommended that she see a therapist or a counselor. And I'm like, what? What is it you're talking about? And so then the woman shared a little bit about what they're talking about. I'm like, no, this is like exactly spot on and right in the middle of the scale of coachability here. This is not a refer off. And that's the big point I want to make. One of my first big points, and it's on page 2 of your notes. And that is, to have emotions is to be human. To have emotions is to be human. So to be human is to have emotions. We all have emotions, and they're going to come out. And this is a huge, it's a place of what we look at for leaders, and we've got to get there. One of the things that we've got to get going is to understand how emotions work, and then how to use emotions for the benefit of our client. Use meaning take a look at and examine the emotions. So look on the paper here. So lack of emotional self-awareness can be a fatal flaw in leaders. Okay, so I think of the people we coach. If they're not aware of their own emotions, okay, that was our quote there. I forget I have slides. If they're not aware of their emotions, then it can be a fatal flaw. And I'm going to give you a coaching demonstration a little bit later that's going to demonstrate how that was actually working for somebody that I coached with, and how they weren't aware of their emotions, and therefore they didn't realize what was going on. A lot of what we hear about in emotional intelligence is about being self-aware of your emotions, and then how you respond then to other people. And then be aware of their emotions in how you're interacting with them. And when people are not self-aware of your own emotions, and you're not self-aware of the emotions in other people, your ability to communicate and effectively have a relationship and communicate well with people is very limited. So when you don't understand your emotions will control your response. Do you get that? When you don't understand your emotions control your response. And this goes all the way back to this philosopher, Spinoza, and his book, The Ethics, which I didn't catch it, but it was way back, like BC times. He said, emotion, this is the translation, emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it. Now, don't go too far on the suffering bit. I think what he has a different meaning than what we have in our modern day suffering. But the point is that the emotions control you until you form a clear and precise picture of it. When you do form that clear and precise picture of your emotions, they no longer control you. And so and in his words, it ceases to be suffering. In other words, you don't suffer from it. It doesn't have control over you when you do that. And so in the notes, there's 3 ways that coaching clarify that when you coach around emotions and you bring emotional clarity, it increases behavioral change in 3 ways. Now, on the handout, I actually gave a link to the study that shows this, so you can check me out and see if it's true. Okay, but here it is that emotional clarity increases ease of behavioral change in 3 ways. Emotional clarity of emotions presents more courses of action. In other words, if you're clear about your emotion, you will see and be able to imagine more courses of action. Okay. The second one is clarity of emotions allows for easier self-regulation and clearer thinking. In other words, if I'm clear what's happening inside of me, in other words, somebody does something and then that causes a reaction inside of me, a feeling inside of me. The clearer I am about that feeling, and where that feeling came from, the emotion that prompted it. So is there some kind of fear in me? Is there some sort of worry that I have in me? That if they do this, then this other thing, bad thing could happen to me. And at an emotional level, you're reacting and you're getting feelings. And then what happens is we behave according to that, but we may not be clear what that chain of events is that's happening inside of us. So if we get clarity of emotions, we have an easier chance of self-regulating and then being able to think more clearly, because if I can trace back that because they're going to do this, it's making me think that I'm going to miss out or worry that I'm going to be overlooked or whatever, then it makes it easier for me to be able to think clearly, to choose, do I want to respond that way or not? How true is that thinking? How much do I need to be worried about that thing happening? Maybe I don't need to be worried about it, but maybe I do. The third way that clarity of emotions what it does is it increases the ease of acceptance of the emotion. So I had to, I'm trying to think of an example for me, but so I had to work with someone that I didn't like. I didn't like them for very good reasons. And it's none of our trainers. So all of our trainers who are on this call, don't worry, it's not you. But I had to work with somebody and I didn't like them. I didn't like them because I didn't like their character. I didn't like their outlook. I didn't like their competitiveness. I didn't like the way they took credit for stuff that wasn't theirs to take credit for, all these types of things. But I had to work with them. And so I spent some time reflecting on my emotions, and I actually got some coaching about what was happening inside of me working with this person. And part of it was I was trying to get some options on how to change this person and how I might be able to be, if I had to work with them, how I could be more effective with them. And a lot of it had to do with getting clear about what I was feeling. And when I got clearer on what I was feeling, it made it easier for me to have everything on this list. More courses of action. It was easier for me to self-regulate and not let myself get angry because she's not going to change. And so I can't change her, but I can change how I react. And so understanding what was reacting inside of me helped me to self-regulate that, think clearer, come up with different courses of action. And then I could just simply accept the emotion that I don't like this person. And when they talk and do that, they make me mad because I'm constantly reading into everything they say like that. Okay. So this is the idea of when we have clarity of emotion, it eases our behavioral change. And that's what we're looking for with clients, is we're looking for behavioral change. We're looking for them to be able to make shifts. And if they get clearer on their emotions, they'll be able to do that. So since we're not able to, where's my cursor? Since we're not able to have you come on and comment, which is what I'd love to have you do, okay? And so what I'd love to have you do, you can then put something in the chat box. If you have a comment about this, seen it in action, a question about it, and I'll give you a second to do that before I move on. I like interactive, so I prefer it when we're all able to talk and you can come on and ask a question or make a comment.
And so Kelly's chimed in there. As a coach, using feedback to our clients is a very powerful way to explore emotions and bring back clarity.
Yes.
Yes. And can you just, to make it easier for those listening, what information are you wanting to draw from them right now?
I'd love to hear their comments or questions regarding the idea that we do need to be, I'm making a case for we do need to be coaching emotions. And why it's a benefit of that if we coach around emotions and help people get clarity of emotions, even through the emotion, that it is going to ease their behavioral change, which is what coaching is about.
Mm-hmm. Lisa says, thank you for setting this out so clearly. It's an area she finds difficult still in her stage of training.
Yeah.
Tim often says, what's behind that to bring clarity?
Mm-hmm. Great. Great. I'm seeing, wow, lots of good comments coming out. Do you want to pick out another one, Jenny?
Yeah, Pam mentions that it helps them be successful despite the emotions. Kristen is saying excellent points. Doesn't come naturally to her.
Okay.
But these kind of trainings are really great for those that, this doesn't come very naturally. And then someone said people generally avoid expressing emotion, so they bypass self-awareness. Coaching in emotion releases new insights as to what motivates them.
Yes. I think one of the comments in there about somebody not having a lot of experience with this or uncomfortable with it. So this is where you as a coach, your growth affects your client coaching. Because if you're uncomfortable with emotions, you're going to bypass it. So you're going to go right off the emotion and on to something else. And it will still be questions and still be coaching, but you will miss the opportunity to help them gain that clarity of emotion, which may present a different course of action than what they had before. So it's the coach's own self-awareness and comfort or discomfort makes a huge difference. For me, I used to be very uncomfortable with coaching around emotions. I'll tell you a story. Early on, and this is before coaching times, I was leading a workshop, and we were creating a board where everyone's making a timeline, a personal timeline of their life. And so all of the significant events and circumstances and people in your life, you would put a Post-it note labeling that, and you'd put yellow ones for, happy or pleasant events that happen in your life, and you'd put pink ones. You'd write it on a pink Post-it note for things that were painful, and then you'd put it in order on a timeline chart, and it made this chart for you to do it. And then what we did is we shared it afterwards, and everybody took time to share their life story via these Post-it notes. And so it was all men in this, and again, this is 20 years ago for me, and so it's all men in this. And one guy was sharing, and he came to a very painful episode in his life, and he started to cry in this small group of men. There's 6 men. And in my thinking, I didn't want him to be uncomfortable crying in front of everyone. So I cracked a joke. And I made a joke about that. And he kind of went, yeah, he kind of laughed. Everybody laughed. And he kind of sniffed it off. And yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then he moved on and started sharing from the next line up of the happy notes, and continued down sharing his timeline. Well, the guy who was mentoring me in this process and leading this process asked me afterwards. He said, Keith, I noticed that when that man started to cry, that you cracked a joke. And I said, yeah, I didn't want him to be uncomfortable, crying in front of everybody. And he says, he looked at me and he said, him be uncomfortable crying and showing emotion, or you being uncomfortable with his emotion? And immediately I knew it was me. I was uncomfortable with his emotion. And so I used my technique. When my emotions come out, I would crack a joke to get out of that emotion so that I could then be, I don't know, even keel or whatever. And I was using the same technique in leading the group. I cracked a joke in order to get him out of that emotional state so that he could continue on. And I thought, that's not good. And then Paul said to me, he said, Keith, did you notice where he continued sharing after everyone, including him, stopped laughing? I said, no. He goes, he moved on. And he said, you missed the deeper stuff that happened in that painful time. You missed that story because of the joke. The joke made him maybe feel more comfortable with the emotion, but it brought him out of the moment. It brought him out of the deeper thing that he was processing and explaining to the group. And we missed it. And I thought, oh my goodness, that is so difficult. And I felt terrible, of course, but I've always remembered that. It was 20 years ago, maybe, somewhere back in there. And as I started to coach, I started to see the same things happening. People would get emotions, whether it's tears, whether it's anger. I had a guy swearing at God. I coach missionaries a lot. And I had a guy, he's literally swearing at God over Skype. And I'm thinking, wow, any second he's going to get zapped and I'm just going to see smoke on the other end of the screen. But what I realized was God is fine. Man, God's okay with this. I don't need to defend God. I didn't need to say anything to this guy. He knew he shouldn't be swearing at God, but he's getting this emotion out. And as he got it out, I said, I just asked a few, I didn't rebuke him about it or anything. I just said, where's this? I knew where it was coming from. He was deeply, deeply wounded and hurt and disappointed. And he was blaming it on God. Why did God bring us here to this place and then abandon us? It's like David in the Psalms. It was that kind of anguish. He just used swear words, which I think is the most productive way of handling it. But I think what God was saying in that moment, or at least what I sensed, was, no, I've got this guy right where I want him. I've got this guy going all the way down and to the depths. And he is now listening and paying attention. He's lashing out, but he's paying attention. And we talked about where that pain's coming. We talked about the depth of the pain and the disappointment he's dealing with. And sure enough, during this process, he's like, yeah, I just really repent of, what I was saying before, and, swearing at God. And my point is that processing that emotion, both the tears in the one case and then the anger in the other case, processing the emotion brought us to meaning, is what it was. In the group setting, I didn't let him go with his emotions. I deflected it, and therefore we didn't get the meaning. With the guy with the anger, we actually got his meaning of where the meaning was in that, and we were able to explore it and get to it. So I want to get to ICF core competencies. So again, a lot of people shy away from emotions. The two examples, I've had a lot of people cry on me with coaching. A lot of people, including upfront and demonstrations. It is so normal. What it means is, it's as Walt said earlier in his comment, hey, it means we're just about to get somewhere. To me, when the emotions start coming out, within reason. Obviously, if it's a total wreck, and then there's degrees of emotions, right? So if they're a total wreck and they're just sobbing and wailing, then that may need a different approach. But just your normal tears and having difficulty to talk, or the ticked off, or the passion. Again, it's not all negative or painful emotions. It can be passionate emotions. When somebody starts pounding the table and they start raising their voice and their feet up like that, that's an emotion. So here's the ICF core competencies. There's 4 of them in the ICF core competencies. You can see it's 0.7 underneath coaching presence, is working with the ability to work with strong emotions and self-manage, not be overpowered. I think the not be overpowered is, we don't just simply say, oh, you need therapy, I'm sorry, we need to stop. Although that's always a possibility that could be the case. Or becoming enmeshed in the client's emotions, where you get so sucked in with empathy that you're just sucked, oh, that must be so difficult, and oh my goodness, I just cannot imagine that. And now all of a sudden you're enmeshed in their emotions, and you're not able to help them process and gain clarity on it because you got sucked in too. Or you start thinking about when you went through that, and suddenly you're a bigger wreck than they are. Right? And I've had that too, where, it's like, I'm the one crying and they're not even crying, but I'm crying because it's totally touching something in me, because I experienced what they're experiencing and it was so painful. And so I had to get my own emotions under control to be able to coach them through what's going on for them. Anyway, you can see the other ones on the paper here and on the slide. Let me just show you in the PCC. Oh, I don't have the PCC core competency. The PCC markers, there's a number of things regarding, and I put it in the paper, so if you turn to the next page, you can see it, like active listening. Look at the second one. Coach inquires about or explores the client's use of language. Why did they use that language? Why did they say worried? Why did they say what I'm afraid of? Why did they say I got to give myself permission? Or I'm having trouble handling this. Why did they use those words, right? Then the coach inquires about or explores the client's emotions, explores the client's tone of voice, pace of speech, inflection as appropriate, that excited voice, pointing out the fact that you've got, that there's a lot of excitement in there. You see what I mean? These are, even though only one word emotion shows up in competency 5 under PCC markers 0.3, really emotions will show up in 2, 3, 4, clients' behaviors. Why did you be? You're not going to ask, why did you behave that way? You need to probe more better than just why. But looking at the behavior is often prompted by emotion. So looking at that. And then the way do they perceive their world? all of those things are around emotions. Look at competency number 6, powerful questioning. Same thing, helping them go beyond their current thinking to new and expanded ways of thinking. See, my whole point with the previous little section was, if they don't understand their emotions, they're not going to have expanded thinking and therefore changed behavior. So we've got to get there. So I'm going to show you in just a moment coaching, how you coach around emotional self-awareness. But before that, Jenny has a code for us for the ICF credits for this course.
Yes, thank you. The first part of the passcode is Hebrews, the book in the Bible. HEB as in boy, REWS, Hebrews. Thank you, Keith.
Great. So I want to look at this. We're halfway through our time, so I want to make sure we get into the how do you do this, because I've been making a case for why we need to do this. So let's make sure we get to the how. Okay. So look on sorry, I didn't put page numbers on these. This must be about page 3. It says coaching emotional self-awareness. So you're an executive coach, okay? And I've asked Terry Ann to be that executive coach in the dialogue with me in a minute. So Terry Ann is an executive coach. Now, let me also just preface, executive coaching, in that realm of the world, there's a little bit more, they have a little bit more license to say in a little bit of things. It's not 100% just questions, how this tends to work, okay? So this executive coach is at a department meeting observing her client, okay? So she's actually seeing her client, Bob, in action. Your client manager, who's a manager, listens to a report from somebody else and then makes a couple of sarcastic comments to knock down his colleague a peg or two. Well, not good, okay? And the coach witnessed it. So here's the first approach. You have a talk, you as the coach, have a talk with this manager. So he apologizes to his colleague because, and have a talk it could be, what was going on that way and sarcasm, but he just kind of treats it lightly and, yeah, I was having a bad day or whatever, and I'm going to apologize. I shouldn't have said that, like this. And then that's the end of the discussion. That's approach number 1. The problem is it happens again in a slightly different form a few days later. And although you confronted the behavior or you had a discussion about the behavior, the manager's unaware of what's happening inside of him that is prompting this behavior. So just talking about the behavior but not getting any further than that is leaving him not self-aware, so he does it again in a different way. That's the limitation of not exploring the emotion. But let's look at the approach 2. Discuss the emotions behind the manager's behavior. Perhaps the manager felt competitive because his own team's results don't look as good in comparison. Or maybe he felt inadequate in his own leadership. Resenting that feeling, he jumps to fear that he may be discovered for being inadequate and lose his position. You see what I mean? People are super complex, and we make these emotions are unconscious things that just happen physiologically on our body. It's often a fight or flight type of thing when there's a fear or a worry or something like that. This emotion will come out and then it produces a feeling, and then those feelings produce behaviors. And his behavior was sarcastic comments, cutting his colleague down. So what we want to know is, why was he doing that? What's the deeper thing there? Not just, oh, I'm a sarcastic person. No. What was it that triggered those comments for that person in that moment? So there's a lot of things that could be happening. And so this is what we want to find out. Because if this behavior continues for this manager, the manager is likely to be removed or not move up or get fired. And it's not for what he was necessarily afraid of, but for his behaviors that he's doing as a result of those fears. You see how complex this is here? It is. It's systemic is what it is. There's some complexity. The behavior is produced by feelings that we have. The feelings are prompted by emotions we have. The greater clarity we get on the emotion and the feelings, the better we're going to be able to self-regulate our feelings and therefore our behaviors. That's what we're talking about with our client. Okay, so yes.
Terry Ann has a question. Is it okay? Is this an okay time to ask?
Let me see. Is it there?
at the very bottom, if you experience an emotional pain relating to something within your life, and this paralyzes you as a coach, do you advise the client of that?
No, I don't think I would. Well, paralyze is pretty strong word. So I don't know. Assuming you can continue to coach, we need to self-manage ourselves and then continue the best we can. I think self-manage, unless it's super extreme, self-manage, and then you need to work on that outside of the relationship and not bring your stuff into the coaching. Particularly because it's not about helping the client, it's about you being triggered for something. And that's what we have mentor coaches for and coaching supervisors for, to help us to think through that kind of thing. I had a client, and I just didn't like the guy, and it was no fault of his own at all. He totally reminded me of somebody else I didn't like. I'm sorry, both examples today have been people I don't like. I usually like people. I like most people, okay? So don't get me too wrong here. But these two examples that I'm thinking about were like that. And this guy totally reminded me of this person I didn't like. So I had to actually think through that. And I don't think I got mentor coaching around it, but I had to think through it so that I could self-manage myself and keep saying, and that basically I had to keep saying, he is not this other guy. He is not this other guy. And that's what helped me to be able to coach this guy. And but if I wasn't able to self-manage, I would have recommended that this person get someone else to coach him. I probably wouldn't have told him that, I'm sorry, you remind me of this irritating person I used to have to deal with, and sorry, I can't coach you. That wouldn't be good. So I would have found some other excuse, I think, to do it. But I would have referred if I couldn't self-manage. And it's the same thing. If they're bringing up a painful thing in their life and that's triggering something in you and you're unable to self-manage that, then that would be a sign that you might need to refer. And that's part of the ICF coaching ethics that we have. Okay. So let's go into the example now. I'm going back to the executive coach. Okay. Remember, the executive coach is going to get a little bit more license to add a little bit of commentary. Terry Ann, you're going to be the executive coach. I'm going to be Bob. Okay. And
okay.
You and me just came out of this meeting where I just roasted Becky. She's sharing her report, and I just roasted her with a couple of sarcastic comments that are direct, that were like cutting her down. And you're now bringing this up to me in our debrief, which is what you are paid. I'm paying you to do this because I'm wanting to grow as a leader. So I brought you in. Okay, that's our context. Okay, so you can let me have it. All right, so Coach, go ahead.
Bob, what was up with your rude comments to Becky in there?
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just having a bad day.
Actually, it's happened a few times the past couple of weeks. What was going on inside of you when Becky was speaking?
Well, I was ticked off.
About what?
Well, to be honest, about how she gets the spotlight and she gets extra resources and budget while we're scraping by because our team isn't working on the latest new thing.
So you're feeling threatened by Becky and resentful of how you believe you and your team are being treated.
Yeah, well, that sounds worse than it is, but yeah, basically.
What are you afraid of here?
Well, to be honest, I'm afraid that I've been sidelined in this current role while people like Becky are moving forward. She's getting all the attention and the budget.
And this fear resulted in your comments in the meeting?
Yeah, I guess. It sounds pretty childish, though, when we say it like that.
When we're afraid and not fully aware of it, we have an unconscious fight or flight response. Now that you're aware of your underlying emotions, you can choose your response. You can even choose to continue feeling this way or not.
Yeah, well, what I'm doing right now isn't working. I mean, the fact that we need to have this conversation is embarrassing.
In the future, when you feel these emotions, how would you like to respond?
Well, I'd like to maintain perspective. It's not a sum zero game. Becky can get attention, but that doesn't mean that I'm being sidelined. And I want to be generous and encouraging to everybody on the bigger team.
What difference do you think that this response would make?
Well, I'd be contributing to the group rather than distracting and showing myself to be the kind of leader the company's looking for. So it's my contribution that's going to get me noticed for advancement, not my sarcasm. What I did today with Becky actually hurts me, maybe even more than it hurts her. And it's not who I want to be.
So what are you realizing about yourself?
Well, there's a lot more going on under the surface than I was aware of in that meeting. And I can't believe how insecure and petty I was feeling. I want to be more aware of what's going on in me and reframe my responses. So thank you, Terry Ann, for reading that. So so look in this dialogue, and again, this dialogue is written. It's written to teach here. So it's not 100% exactly how things might go, but look at where it starts. So, at the end of the dialogue, here's the 5 steps. So let's just look at the 5 steps really quick, and then we'll go back to the dialogue and see if we can spot them there. Okay. So the first step is to look behind the behavior. So the idea is the coach isn't just being, looking at the behavior. The coach is wondering and is curious about what's behind the behavior. Okay. So then ask about what's happening inside. And then the second is ask about what triggered that internal response. And then third is gain clarity on the emotions. It may not be emotions. So the internal response could be something else. There could be something besides emotions, but let's just say it was emotions. And then create new options. So look at what the coach did. If you go back to the page before where the coach starts, Bob, what was up with your rude comments in there to Becky? For me, I think that's just fine to label them as rude because it's pretty indisputable it was a rude comment. So to call it as rude, I think that's great direct communication in there. You could make it more neutral by just saying what was up with your comments in there to Becky, but so then he just kind of dismisses it as, yeah, I was having a bad day. And that's where the dialogue often would go off, and it wouldn't go full to interchange is if you get caught up in this bad day. Oh yeah, what else is going on in your day? You see how you're now off of the thing? You're now on the external of the bad day. You're letting his excuse, you're being blinded by his excuse of having a bad day or something like that. But the coach has actually heard something like this in previous coaching or observations. And so the coach actually says, basically she's saying it's not just a bad day. This has been happening. There's a pattern here, right? And so she asks, what was going on? And here's the thing. You've got to use words that are actually going to direct people to the internal. And so you can't be subtle. I think that, or at least I've found, I can't be subtle. If I'm too subtle, they stay talking about the external things. Yeah, well, my car broke down on the way to work and all this kind of stuff. It's like, if you just say, well, so what was going on as Becky was speaking? I was just thinking about all the thing. And they're going to talk about external stuff out there. So if you want them to think about what was going on inside them, say the word inside you. And be that direct with it. So what was going on inside of you when Becky was speaking? And then he says, I was ticked off, right? So that's a feeling of being ticked off. And what we want to know is, where's that coming from? And so coach says, about what? And then Bob starts self-revealing some of his thinking. And he may not have even consciously thought this. He didn't put these things together. This is reaction. Okay. But when he starts thinking about it, he's like, yes, she gets the spotlight extra, but we're not getting anything because we're not on the latest new thing. Can you see it's also a limiting assumption that he has that because his team's not working on the new thing, he's not important anymore. And that's a limiting assumption. And it's part of that is triggering his feelings of of it. So the coach then actually does a bit of the labeling of what those feelings are. And I find this to be very normal, is people aren't, Bob may not be very self-aware regarding his emotions. He's never going to come up with threatened and resentful on his own. He's just going to say mad, because he just goes to that base emotion like that. And I find that a lot of people, including myself, have needed help to label the emotion a little bit, what that is, okay? And so here we've got to, so you're looking at this, and so the coach says, feeling threatened by Becky and resentful, and about how your team's, and feeding that back. Is that right? He's like, yeah, it sounds bad, but yes. And so then the coach goes into to dig a little bit more. So there's threatened and resentful, but we still don't know why. Why is he resentful? Why does he feel threatened? What's he afraid is going to happen? Right? So then what are you afraid of here? Well, and then he says, to be honest, sidelined, and this fear. And so he goes into it, and the coach says, yeah, not being fully aware of our emotions can make us act in ways we don't want to act, right? And he says, well, that's not how I want to be. So the coach then starts now into, what are you going to do about this, right? Now that there's some awareness of, yeah, I feel threatened because I'm afraid I'm going to get behind. And so now the coach goes into asking about future alternatives, a bit more clarity on the emotions. So now you can see what alternatives. So what would you like to do when you have these responses? So then he gives a couple of good insights. They're probably maybe too good for first draft in one paragraph, but for our teaching example, it's the basic idea. May have needed more dialogue to get there. And then look what the coach does. The last thing, this is where you really go internal into the transforming part. And this can be used anywhere in your coaching. What are you realizing about yourself? This takes it from out there is where the change happens to in here is where the change happens. What are you realizing about yourself? Wow, I'm realizing there's a lot more going on, he says, than I was aware of. And I can't believe how insecure and petty I was. You see how he's fully got a grasp of, it's his insecurity that was causing him to feel threatened and resentful. It's his insecurity. See how that's in him, which he can change, versus the resentful and threatened is, they're doing it to me. He's no longer the victim. He now has a choice in how he responds, and he wants to reframe it. So you can see how that goes in there. And again, every time you do a dialogue like this, it can be a bit idealistic with it. But look at those 5 steps in there. So first is you have to be looking beyond the behavior to what's going on inside, and then ask about what's happening inside. So. And under point 2 there, under the 5 steps to coach emotional awareness, you're often only going to get, okay, somebody's asking for me to change the slide. Okay. So you're often only going to get the surface, right? Like he said, I'm having a bad day, or I was angry, or something like that. But you would ask questions to probe more deeply. So what was happening inside? Or, so what feelings were you experiencing right then? Or, so what does that mean to you? So what does it mean to you that she gets attention, right? So she's getting more attention maybe. So what does that mean to you that she's getting attention? You see how I'm asking about meaning without using the word around feeling or emotion. What does that mean to you? Or what does that mean for you? It's still talking about internal. That's the point. It's not always going to be about emotion, but it's about internal. It's about the way of thinking. It's that the PCC marker about helping them understand their way of thinking and explore new ways of thinking, right? And you have to listen for that to find out what's happening. And then the number 3, ask about what triggered that internal response. And this is where you may get to the root emotion or the root whatever it is. Maybe it's a paradigm, or maybe it's a limitation or self-limiting belief that they have about themselves or something. There's a lot of overlap between these things, but it's what did it. So what did that emotion trigger in you? Or, okay, so when she said that, what did that trigger inside of you? right? And keeping it internal focused of what was happening inside and helping them to reflect on those things. And again, what does that mean to you? Well, what does that mean for you? You know, you could hear it and go, yeah, so why is that threatening? You're thinking. And so what does that mean to you? It means, and then they start telling you what the fear is. And so that's what we're looking at. And then gain clarity. Number 4, on the emotions, discuss how appropriate that feeling is. Is that, because you see, we can control our feelings our emotions and feelings come up, right? And we can gain clarity, and we can discuss how appropriate that is. In other words, it's not every feeling is correct. No, it's not necessarily correct. That's what we need to look at, is which feelings are correct and which are not correct. And what's the proper emotional response to have. Emotions, in some schools of thought, emotions are totally uncontrollable in the sense of the basic 6. You're happy, angry, disgusted, and I can't remember the other 2. But those basic 6 are physiological reactions. In that sense, you can't control. They just happen. But the feelings that come from those, we can control. And we need to gain clarity on those to understand what those things are. So you can say to the person, so how are these, and again, maybe you want to label it not emotions. Maybe these, you could go all the way to thoughts. So how are these thoughts helping or serving you or hindering you? Or how are these feelings serving or hindering you? Or what else is true about this situation? Coach, in our example, didn't go there, but you could easily have said that with Bob. What else is true about this? Yeah, so she's getting more attention, but what else is true? Well, it's also true that just because she gets attention doesn't mean that I'm not important, for example. And then helping the client to create new options, which is alternatives to doing that. And there's 2 questions on the final page of the handout around creating new options. So what do you want to do with this emotion? Okay, so, or feeling, or when you have, or thoughts, anything, when you have this, basically, if you want to label it generically, when you have this internal happening, what do you want to do with it? And it could be, I want to pause, and I want to stop, and I want to realize where this is coming from, and so that I can react differently, or so I don't react, so I actually choose my behavior, right? That would be a fantastic way of self-managing. And then, you know, how do you want to respond in the future? Is another question on that. So this is my 5-step process of coaching emotional self-awareness in people. And again, this process is very, very similar to what it looks like to coach limitations people have, self-limiting beliefs, assumptions that are not true or might be true, but we don't know. Those are the things that this basic process is the same for almost all internal stuff in there. So I'd love to hear of, I see there's a question, but it's a question that prefaces everything we're talking about today. So I want to come back to that question that Kristen is making, or someone else is. But what questions do you have about this 5-step process itself? What questions do you have, or do you have any comment? We have just 5 minutes here, and we can see what question you have about this process, or a comment. And I don't get to hear you typing, so I don't know if you're typing. I'll give it a second here.
I think it's so helpful to have these kind of steps. And I think for the person who said, you know, they're not a natural, yeah, no matter what the emotion is, this is something you could follow. Yeah, Kelly added that they're a helpful roadmap. Janice shares that the process is clear.
Yeah, and Sherry just said we can coach ourselves in this process too. And that's very true, because sometimes I have emotions, and so that's how I We call it in coaching. A lot of times it's called self-regulation, right? It's that's not the word. It's basically it's monitoring what's happening inside of you. In other words, am I pursuing this line of questioning because this is where I think the major this is where I want to go, and with it, it's like, we have to look inside of ourselves to examine that, to see what's happening in us. Or am I pursuing this? Do I think this is a problem, and therefore, if something's triggering in me, that's what we're after. Yeah. Okay. People are talking about the 6 major emotions. So, yeah. So there's a lot of schools of thoughts when it comes to emotion, and this isn't the course for it, but you can look it up. If you look up Wikipedia on emotions, you'll see the different schools of thought. And there's one school of thought that says there's 6 base emotions. And then what you have is, they've mentioned them there. And then the 6 base emotions produce a physiological reaction. In other words, it bypasses the brain. It produces a physiological reaction, and that is instantaneous. It's the thing that, they would say, it's the thing that kept us from being eaten by a bear. Is you don't think, is that a bear? Isn't it a bear? You just immediately, if you have this emotional base reaction that says, that might be a bear, and you immediately start to move. Adrenaline pumps and it makes it to go. And then what happens is on top of that, in the emotional wheel, you've got all these feelings out here like this. And some people distinguish, some schools of thought distinguish these as the base emotion that causes a physiological reaction. And then you've got all the feelings, other people label them emotions out here, which are more of a mental process. So it's you mentally doing something with that. But anyway, regardless, we have to explore it if we're going to get there. Now, we've got just a couple of minutes, and there was a question up at the top, and that is, what if your client, what was the question, Jenny?
Kristen asked, how would you work with someone who isn't comfortable with emotions?
Okay, so I just was on a call with Kim Zovak, who's an MCC, this morning, and we were talking about this. You've got to have it in your contracting up front. The fact that you are not, the fact that what are we coaching about in this process? So, for example, we need to let them know that coaching includes going into transformation and change, and that people need to make changes. They need to be ready to make personal changes that will result in transformation in them. And that's going to mean that at times we're going to need I want to ask you some very personal questions, and questions about what's going on inside of you. Is that going to be okay as we coach together? That kind of agreement and contracting and expectations needs to be set up front, so that when it comes to going into their internal, that you've got permission in the contracting up front to do that. You may need to redo that again in the moment if you're going there. You may need to ask a permission question and say something like, so I'd like to, or let's say I'm seeing Jenny's picture, so I'll use Jenny as my client. So Jenny, I'd like to ask you about something, inside you. It would be okay if I asked something a little bit more personal than where we've been talking just now. And then chances are she's going to say yes, because we have some trust and she realizes this is about her and not me and so on. Then I could ask her about that. But we've got to get that contracting in the middle. And in fact, the fact that someone won't go internal, and I'm not talking about turning everything into internal and emotional and all that. So again, don't go all extreme on me here. But if someone won't ever go internal, that's not a coachable person for me. And I'm going to want to have a discussion about that. So, for example, I might bring it up to say, so boy, each time we've tried to go more inside of what's happening in you, you seem hesitant and actually reluctant to go there. What's going on for you? And I would bring that up as an awareness. It's an awareness thing. I want them to, I want to understand what's happening in them, but not just for me and for my benefit, because I want to coach inside them, but for their internal benefit. Because if they're doing it with me, they're doing it with other people. And it could be the thing that's holding them back. So thank you for being on today. We are at the hour. I'd love to hear some, or just have you type in some highlights. What's one highlight that, that you have from today? That one thing that you're taking away?
While you guys are adding that information to the chat, I want to share the second part of the passcode. Just like you would see a scripture reference, the second part is 11:1. So that those are the numbers 11:1. And want to remind everyone that in order to get your continuing education certificate, you are going to need to use your full name and the two-part passcode from this session. A different passcode will be used for each session, and they will never be repeated. So make sure you have that written down, and you should be receiving an email with instructions on how to do that.
Yeah, can you say it again, Jenny? Someone's asking for
that.
that.
The passcode is the numbers, not the words. The numbers 11:1.
11:1. Okay, and then the previous part was midway through our session. Good. Well, thanks for having me on. Hey, I'm showing a couple of free resources. One's something I call the coaching roadmap. It's how to overcome the 3 most common ministry obstacles for people who are in a ministry setting anyway. And coaching's part of that. And then over on my blog at keithwebb.com, I post articles on coaching and leadership. And I have this one resource called 50 Powerful Coaching Questions. And you can go over to keithwebb.com and sign up for that. So thank you very much, Cece and I, for having me on today. I appreciate it. Jenny, thank you for moderating. And Terry Ann, thank you for being my executive coach today and helping me gain greater self-awareness of my emotions. I appreciate it. It's been good being on.
Yes, thank you, Keith, so much for doing this for us. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope to see you with the others.
Great. Take care, everybody.